If you had asked me what my favorite game was when I was 11 years old, I probably would have said The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. This was the first game that I remember actively looking forward to. It was the first game that I pre-ordered. I had played Twilight Princess beforehand, which instantly made me a lifelong fan and follower of the series. And when I played Skyward Sword on release, it more than lived up to my expectations. I was enamored with it. I played it several times non-stop and tried putting all of my friends onto it. However, as an adult, I was terrified to revisit this game. The HD remaster has been out for quite a while now, but I avoided it. Why, you may ask? You see, over the years, Skyward Sword has gained a reputation for being one of the more divisive games in the series. People have voiced a lot of criticisms regarding pacing, reused content, and more that we'll get into later. When you're a kid, you don't really think about stuff too critically. At least I didn't. Now that I'm older, more cynical, and with many more games under my belt, I was worried that all of these criticisms would suddenly become apparent to me. I was worried that my pristine perception of the game would be demolished. And then what happens to all the fond memories I had playing it? Would they suddenly become invalid somehow? I know this all sounds a little dramatic. At the end of the day, it's just a video game. But video games have always been a big part of my life, and this particular game is a very important one. Now that I've finally played the HD remaster, I want to analyze this game from top to bottom in order to find out how I truly feel about it all these years later. This is something that I just have to do. This game means so much to me, and I can't imagine my gaming journey without it. Let's talk about The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. The opening to this game is slow. Painfully slow. I expected as much when I played it as a kid, since Twilight Princess also had an agonizingly dull opening. The humans in this world inhabit the sky, with most living on the largest sky island named Skyloft. People get around the sky islands with giant birds called loftwings, which are based on the real-life shoebills. These things are terrifying, but I also can't look away from them. Link is awoken from a foreshadowy nightmare by Zelda's Loftwing carrying a note that reminds him of an important competition about to take place. Link meets up with Zelda playing the game's excellent main theme on her harp and discovers that his Loftwing has been kidnapped. After getting bullied by Groose, Skyloft's resident asshole, Link finds out that his bird is trapped in a cave full of monsters. It's at this point when swordplay is introduced. Link finds his bird just in time for the ceremony and wins, earning some alone time with Zelda. The mood turns sour, however, when a tornado appears, which results in Zelda going missing and Link being knocked unconscious. Link explains what happens to Zelda's father, Gapora, and he is led by a strange figure towards the goddess statue. It's here that we're introduced to Fi, Skyward Sword's companion character. Trust me, we'll be saying a lot about her later on. Link obtains the goddess sword and the iconic green tunic, and only now can we finally descend to the surface to begin the game proper. So yeah, that's not the most exciting or engaging start to the game. That being said, however, I also couldn't tell you what I would cut. Link's relationship with Zelda has to be established and fleshed out. That's important as it ends up being the main narrative hook throughout the game. You've got to care about these two, and I think Skyward Sword does a great job of making Zelda a likable character. She doesn't feel like a generic damsel in distress. She's kind, but also strong-willed and sometimes brutally honest. She's not even above attempted murder. Twice. Beyond that, you've got to introduce the Groose to prime him for his eventual character development. These encounters are humorous at least, and of course, lots of tutorials. It's a Nintendo game after all, so that's a given. I've learned to expect it at this point, but it's still annoying. This game in particular is pretty handholdy, with Fi interrupting you at every possible junction to state the obvious or to outright spoil puzzle solutions. I'm not kidding. At least in the HD version, you can mash through her text, making her much less annoying. Anyways, aside from the annoying tutorials, I don't consider this game's slow opening to be a problem, or at least not a very big one, especially compared to Twilight Princess. In that game's case, there are absolutely specific things I can point to and say, yeah, that should have been cut. Not so much the case with Skyward Sword. I'll talk briefly about the story before moving to controls and combat. For most of the game, your objective is simply to reunite with Zelda. Yeah, there's some other stuff going on too. Zelda is highly reincarnated, and there's some time travel stuff as well, but it's nothing too crazy. Zelda stories are never that complicated, and this is one of the simpler ones. Link, Zelda, and Impa are the good guys, Girahim and Demise are the bad guys, and it's not much more complicated than that. However, despite the plot's simplicity, I think Skyward Sword has some strong characters. I already went into how much I like this incarnation of Zelda. Groose starts off as a goofy, over-the-top schoolyard bully, but goes through some significant character development over the course of the game. He's entertaining in every scene he's in. I like his silly hairdo, his leitmotif, just a great character. Girahim is probably my favorite villain in the entire series. He's flamboyant, sadistic, and absolutely unhinged in the best way possible. His boss fights are among the best in the game, and his theme is iconic. Just an amazing character all around. He's able to walk this line of being intimidating but also genuinely funny at the same time. He's almost like Zelda's take on the Joker. Really cool stuff. I might not care about the story itself that much, but at least the characters can be enjoyable to watch. The appeal of Zelda games can be a bit hard to pin down at first. There are games out there with better combat, more intricate puzzles, and progression systems. However, these elements are still satisfying, and the game switches between them quite often to ensure that I'm rarely ever bored while playing them. It's an adventure game in the purest sense of the word. Solve a puzzle here, kill a few enemies there, explore for goodies, with the occasional minigame thrown in. It culminates in a rich, immersive gaming experience. The Zelda series has one of the best gameplay loops out of any franchise. Explore the new area, complete the story quest, enter the dungeon, find the dungeon item, kill the boss using said item, grab the heart container, get the plot MacGuffin, rinse and repeat, with plenty of side content for players to engage with at their discretion. It's a formula that's been proven to work across decades of games, but it never gets old. I've heard that some were beginning to tire of this approach by this game, but honestly I feel like I could play games like this for the rest of my life. Part of it might be because of my sentimental attachment to this style of Zelda game, but I also feel like Zelda games do a good job of creating new ideas within these confines in order to give each game its own unique identity. Skyward Sword is no exception. In both tone and art style, the game feels like a hybrid between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. Not quite as cartoonish and goofy as the former, but not as dark and creepy as the latter. I think it's a good compromise since it allows for more serious moments whilst still having a lot of humor and charm. I love how Beetle tries to kill you if you don't buy anything from his shop, how you can break this poor guy's chandelier for a piece of heart, and the look on Link's face when he picks up a Rupor. I also appreciate how Skyward Sword went out of its way to design a lot of new species that are completely unique to this game. Look, I love Zoras and Gorons as much as the next guy, but it's refreshing to see some new character designs too, though there are a couple Gorons here and there. One of the things I was most curious about with this remaster was how they were going to handle transferring the motion controls to a button-only control scheme. The original Skyward Sword is one of the most heavily motion-controlled games I've ever played, so this was kind of a make-it-or-break-it sort of deal. What they did was map most of the motion controls to the right stick. It's unorthodox, I can't think of another game that does something similar, but I like it a lot. I never had any issues with responsiveness, and it didn't take long for it to feel very natural. As far as I remember, the motion controls in the original game functioned pretty well for the most part, but there were a few snags. Mainly, I remember the stab feeling a little bit unresponsive, and the harp was absolutely horrible. I'm happy to report that both of these things were no longer an issue in the remaster. The stab is as easy as clicking in the right stick, and the harp works perfectly fine. Link even brought Plum to tears, having finally mastered his sweep pecking technique. The only issue with the controls in the remaster is skydiving. Link can move in all directions, and he can also dive faster downward, but doing this will lock him into whatever his current position is. The problem is that pushing up on the left stick moves him up, but pushing all the way up is how you execute the downward charge. This leads to some awkward situations where you want to go up, but you press the stick too far and you end up falling faster downwards instead. This is frustrating since it's so easy to fix. Just map the charge to a button. It's not a huge deal since the game doesn't ask you to do precision skydiving all that often, but man is it annoying in those rare instances. I'm happy at least to say that the game as a whole controls better than the original. It's funny, when I was younger I was enamored with motion controls because immersion, I move my hand here and he moves the sword there on the screen. So cool, this is the future of gaming. Nowadays I'm like, no motion controls, ever. Buttons only please. If I want to move around I'll just hit the fucking gym. It's weird how Nintendo was able to accommodate my preference in both stages of my life. Let's go deeper into the combat mechanics. Skyward Sword's combat revolves around slashing in the correct direction relative to where the enemy is blocking. This was done with motion controls in the original, but in the remaster, you just give the right stick a good flick and Link will slash his sword in that direction. You have to think about where the slash will start from though. If the enemy is holding their weapon to Link's right, then you'll do a right flick since the slash will start from the enemy's left. Link has items at his disposal, like any Zelda game, which are situationally useful for certain encounters. Some of the combat in this game can feel like a puzzle, which is nice. Alternatively, Link can use a shield bash to bypass this system entirely, but you'll have to time a parry with the left stick. I wanted to be a parry god on this playthrough. I tried to shield bash almost everything, probably due to all the hours I have in Sekiro. Landing a perfect parry is the most satisfying thing in the world, in any game really, but Skyward Sword is no exception. This game emphasizes the shield a lot more than the other Zeldas. Shields now have durability meters, and incentivizes active engagement with the mechanics at all times, since you don't want to spend rupees to repair your shield or buy a new one. You have 3 different types of shield for the majority of the game, with each type having its own set of upgrades, more on this system later. The wooden shield, iron shield, and sacred shield. The wooden shield is the first one you obtain, but you'll want to switch it for the iron one once you reach Elden Volcano since it's liable to burn. However, I like that it's not necessarily a direct upgrade from the wooden, as that shield will still be useful in the desert area, since the iron can't reflect electricity. The sacred shield is generally a better option in the second half of the game since it can reflect all the elements and repair itself. However, you have to be careful since it doesn't have as much durability, so a lot of mistimed parries in a row could break it and then you're out 500 rupees. It adds an intensity to the combat. There's also a shield with infinite durability available towards the end of the game, that being the iconic Hylian shield. It's a great reward for the endgame boss gauntlet, and comes late enough to not overshadow the other shields. Ironically, I think it's shields that Skyward Sword handles better than any Zelda game. They're satisfying to parry with, there's a punishment for using them incorrectly, and it feels good to upgrade them. The only move that I don't really use that much is, oddly enough, the titular Skyward Strike, though it does get some use in the final boss. Also, you can draw on goddess balls to get some items, which can be a pretty good test of one's maturity. I enjoy the combat in this game quite a bit, especially the one-on-one sword duels. There are only 2 problems that I have. First is that it's pretty easy most of the time. I wish hero mode was available without having to beat the game first, and since I probably would have had more fun there. It's there to incentivize repeat playthroughs, I guess. I usually prefer harder games these days if my unhealthy obsession with FromSoft is any indication, but I can still find enjoyment in easy games as long as the mechanics are solid. Another thing is I wish there was just a bit more enemy variety. It's not a huge deal since combat is not the only thing that this game does, but I would have appreciated some more opportunities to flesh it out. Another thing I'll praise the HD version for is that even without the motion controls, the combat of directional sword slashes with the right stick still feels unique to this game. I wish the game challenged me more, but Skyward Sword's combat is still satisfying and offers a distinct experience even when compared to other Zeldas. The game is set over 3 main areas. On paper, it sounds like way too few for a game as long as this to sustain itself with, and, well, it's complicated. I'll go into more detail later on. For now, I'll go over my thoughts on the areas as a whole. When you first visit an area, it goes something like this. Land on the surface, get acquainted with the new NPCs and mechanics, then you'll have to search the area for a certain amount of a given thing, and only after that can you proceed to the dungeon. These areas are so expansive and interconnected, however, that they almost feel like dungeons in and of themselves, just outdoors. The lush, dense Fairn Woods establishes the gameplay loop pretty well. Plenty of bokoblins and dekubabas around for players to get used to the swordplay, and octoroks to practice the shield bash against. There are some simple puzzles as well. It's also pretty non-linear, but you won't get lost if you make use of the new dowsing mechanic. Basically, the game will point you in the direction of your current objectives. It's still your choice though. If you want to find everything on your own, you can still do that. It's there just to make sure players aren't wandering around for hours trying to find that last MacGuffin. Link will obtain the slingshot before long, which has a surprising number of applications. This game gets quite a lot of mileage out of this item. I'll go over all the dungeons in a separate section, so for now let's move on to Elden Volcano, which is by far my least favorite area in the game for a variety of reasons that will become more apparent as the video goes on. I wouldn't call it bad, however, it's just less interesting than what the rest of the game has to offer. For some positive qualities, I like how vertical it gets in the second half. For the most part, you're playing around with bomb flowers and using the new rolling mechanic to get them across longer distances. You also have to use the terrain to your advantage in some of these instances. Also, the magma mitts are a new item that's not all that interesting, to be honest, at least at first. It's basically a glorified shovel that'll get you some extra rupees or hearts on occasion. Obtaining all the parts of the key can be a little annoying since there's this one section that you have to do multiple times to get everything. And the way the game hides this part rubs me the wrong way a little bit. You see, it's in a super hot area that will damage you over time if you stay in it too long. To me, the game is indicating that you shouldn't be in here, but no, you have to go into this place to progress. I remember getting stuck here for quite a long time in my first playthrough because of this thought process. It could also be that I was just a dumb 11-year-old, so maybe it's not entirely the game's fault, so I'll leave it up to you. Lanayru Desert is by far my favorite of the 3 areas. This place revolves around these time shift stones, which are a super cool and creative mechanic. Basically, you strike one and a portion of the level surrounding it will exist in the past, which is ironically more lush and futuristic. Not only does it look cool, especially in the remaster, but there are a lot of neat puzzles designed around it. It's also here that you get the hook beetle. The beetle is another item unique to this game that gets a ton of usage throughout, and I like it. It's a cool item. There's just one problem that I have with the first visit to the desert. At one point, an NPC from the past will update your map that shows the area as it existed in that time period. Then later, you have to use that map to avoid sinking into the sand in the present time. The problem? Freaking Fi has to spell out to the player what to do. This is what I meant about her spoiling puzzle solutions, by the way. I think it would have been perfectly reasonable to expect players to figure this out on their own, and a lot more satisfying. Why even have this puzzle in the first place if the game's just going to tell you the answer? Aside from that, it's a really great area. I think the bokoblins with tasers are a good variation on a familiar enemy, and a step up in difficulty too. The electric snails are fun to shield bash and are used for quite a few puzzles. And like I said earlier, and how I'll probably continue to say throughout this video, anything to do with the time shift stones is just a good time in pretty much every situation they're in. So, you've beaten the 3 areas and their corresponding dungeons, done the lengthy quest to get inside the Thunderhead, so what happens next? You go back, and then you go back again. Skyward Sword has a problem with reused content, and it's definitely the game's biggest flaw, though I take more issue with some instances than others. Let's talk about an instance of reused content that I'm okay with, for example, the Silent Realms. When I was a kid, I hated these sections for how stressful they can be, but I got a kick out of them as an adult for the very same reason. It's funny, since I was worried about not enjoying this game as much, but now here's an example of the inverse. But anyways, Silent Realms. They take place in the same areas you've already explored, but the context is completely different. There's no combat. You're collecting tears while making sure time doesn't run out, or else you'll be pursued by guardians. You've also got to avoid these guys carrying lanterns and the waking water. However, prior knowledge of the layout is necessary for these to function, or else it'd just be a whole lot of trial and error. The Elden Volcano Silent Realm was my favorite, because there were points where I had to think carefully about how I was going to do things so that I wouldn't screw myself over and not have enough time in between collecting certain tiers. So, W for Elden Volcano. I had some genuinely ass-clenching moments here. For completing the Silent Realms, you're rewarded with items that will help you explore more of the area, thus revealing the path to the dungeon, along with some optional goodies. In this way, the areas almost have a Metroidvania feel, since those games thrive off of this sort of thing. There are some instances of reused content that I do not approve of, however, like redoing the first dungeon for no reason, or redoing the Elden Volcano Ascent for no reason, while this dick-headed robot is insulting you. Seriously, fuck this guy. Bad gameplay, bad attitude, not funny, horrible character in every conceivable way. I hate him. The second visits to each area are hit or miss because of this sort of thing. Lanayru gets the best revisit in my opinion. It's basically Wind Waker on a much smaller scale. There's not really any exploration to speak of, but the unique method of traversal and content within the islands is enough to sell it. I like the minecart roller coaster ride, and the pirate stronghold is a shockingly good mini dungeon. Farron's revisit is decent, excluding the backtracking I meant earlier, since Lake Floria feels completely different from the rest of the level, and I found climbing the Great Tree to be pretty fun as well. Elden's revisit is the worst by far. Aside from the terrible escort mission, there's very little that you have to do. It's just a teeny tiny new area that has the exact same theme as the rest of the volcano. It's probably because this area is so small that Nintendo felt the need to include the escort mission, but just not having it here and having this be the shortest quest would have been a far better option. The item for clearing the Silent Realm is also handily the worst because it doesn't even feel like an upgrade. It's only here to gate off this one tiny area. Lame. One of the many reasons why Elden Volcano is the weakest of the 3 areas. The quest for obtaining the Song of the Hero is rather infamous. The game has you revisit the 3 main areas yet again. This time the content is even more mixed. The quest starts off with another rematch against the Imprisoned. I'll defend some of this game's reused content, but not this one. It comes way too soon after the previous fight, and it's not mechanically different enough to justify its existence. This is the only part of the Song of the Hero quest that I consider to be unambiguously bad. After that, the water dragon has you collecting tadtones throughout the flooded woods. I don't hate this actually, it took me about 10 minutes to complete with an air potion. It's not the most compelling thing in the world, but it's fine. In Elden, you're forced into a stealth segment with some Metroidvania elements. It's weird. Link has his equipment stolen, and each item reclaimed will unlock the way to the next. It takes a lot longer compared to Farron's quest, unless you factor in the third fight with the imprisoned, but a little more interesting. Like the tadtone hunting, it's unnecessary, but I wouldn't call it bad. In Linneri's case, the game has you explore an entirely new area. Well, not entirely since it reuses the level theme and gimmicks, but it's new content. This is my favorite one if you couldn't tell. You're basically escorting a time-shifted minecart whilst trying to keep up with it on the constantly changing terrain. The puzzles are pretty easy, but there's a sense of urgency to it that kept me engaged. Then we actually have a really cool puzzle. You have to fly this seedling all the way over to Farron and plant it in the past to receive a fruit in the future. It's the only time the game forces you to do something like this. It's pretty cool. Once that's finished, you get access to a boss rush mode with multiple items required for 100% completion. I like the idea, but it forces you to fight the imprisoned even more times, so I can't in good conscience say that I enjoyed all of it. The Song of the Hero quest is by far the least compelling part of the game. That being said, I don't think any part of it on its own is bad, excluding the rematch with the imprisoned. I also think that other instances of reused content in the same game make it seem worse than it actually is. I'll also defend it in the context of the whole series. Specifically, I want to argue against Skyward Sword being worse than the other 3D Zeldas. Wind Waker's Triforce Hunt was so bad that it made me quit on my first playthrough, and it would be some time before I returned to finish it. And Twilight Princess has that overly long statue quest to access the city in the sky. Remember that? Kinda sucked. I wouldn't say that any of these things ruin their respective games. I say all of this because the quest is often brought up as this major game-ruining flaw and one of the reasons Skyward Sword is a more divisive entry. Sure, all of these things might bother some players more than others, but for me, Skyward Sword's underwhelming third arc is no worse than the worst parts of other Zeldas. One of the more disappointing things about Skyward Sword is how underutilized the sky is, especially when compared to Wind Waker's Great Sea. I don't think that Zelda games have to have great exploration to be good, if my fondness for this game is any indication, but it sure can help. Unfortunately, Skyward Sword's overworld is pretty underdeveloped. Aside from a handful of locations, we're talking like 3, there's not much to discover on your own. The sky mostly functions as a means to collect rewards from goddess cubes. And don't get me wrong, I like goddess cubes as a mechanic. They incentivize exploration on the surface, encourage revisiting previously explored areas for hidden goodies, this is part of the Metroidvania appeal I was talking about earlier, and give you something to look forward to when you return to the sky. I just wish that this wasn't all that there was to do in the sky. In a perfect world, we'd have more NPCs populating the other islands, towns other than Skyloft, miniature dungeons, even some more story-related content taking place in the sky, such as dungeons, would have been nice. I realize that this might be asking for too much given limited developer resources, budget, time constraints, and stuff like that, but I do feel like more could have been done with the sky. As far as side quests go, I feel much more positively. First of all, it's refreshing to play a game nowadays that doesn't have a quest log. Maybe this is just a me thing, but it's much more satisfying to complete a quest without the game telling me exactly what to do and where to go at every point. It works because the quests are still intuitive to complete. I was able to figure them out when I was 11. Let me know if any of you feel the same about quest logs. I'm genuinely curious to see if anyone feels me on this. As far as the actual content of the side quests, Link will be doing things like housework, cheating on Zelda, getting your friend hooked on PEDs, community service, breaking this guy's chandelier, and sleeping in other people's beds in clear violation of the Third Amendment. In all seriousness, the side quests are par for the course for any Zelda. It's a nice distraction for the main quest, but nothing that'll blow your mind. I think the amount of side content, however, is perfect and never overwhelming. Most of the quests revolve around obtaining gratitude crystals for this demon named Betro. You'll get some nifty rewards too, including heart pieces. I always have to have 2 full sets of hearts by the end of any Zelda game, just doesn't feel right otherwise. I will say that the ultimate reward is kind of useless. You will most likely not need anywhere close to that amount of rupees. This is also par for the course for 3D Zeldas, funnily enough. Having trash rewards for huge game-spanning side quests is so common, it's almost a series tradition. All that being said, I think the side content in Skyward Sword fulfills its role about as well as any other Zelda. One thing I'll praise Skyward Sword for is the upgrade system. Link can use the treasures he finds throughout the levels to upgrade his dungeon items and shields. I really like this system. It incentivizes thorough exploration by offering you a tangible benefit. A faster beetle is amazing, especially given how much use it gets throughout the game. More damage for the bow? Yes please. Sturdier shields? That can be a lifesaver in certain situations. I like the scattershot too because it gives the item a use even after Link gets the bow. It can take out multiple weaker enemies at once, such as Keese, while the bow is single target only. The upgrades in this game are one of my favorite progression systems in any Zelda. Now let's talk dungeons, my favorite part of any Zelda game. I don't think that Skyward Sword's dungeons are as good as the ones in Twilight Princess, but it's a very strong set overall. Let's go over each one, starting with the Skyview Temple, which is a great first dungeon. Simple yet effective eye puzzles, gemstone puzzles, and you've even got to change the water level at one point. Even some of the enemies feel like miniature puzzles, like these Skulltulas. You have to strike them in a way that leaves their weak point exposed, horizontally for the ones dangling, and upwards when they're grounded. The Stalfos is a fun mini-boss, though I wish he had more health, and you get the beetle for killing him, which is a great item. Once you reach the boss, we have a pretty significant break from tradition. The boss isn't a Goma hanging from a web for the beetle to cut down, but rather a sword duel against the main villain of the game. However, it pays off because the fight still builds on the mechanics of the dungeon, and the beetle is heavily utilized in the rest of the game, so the item doesn't get shafted. You have to hold your sword in a position, and then strike starting from the opposite direction to fake him out. Then, once you've solved the puzzle, he busts out his sword and becomes more offensive. You can strike him relative to where he blocks and shield bash his attacks for more openings. It's pretty easy, I was able to do it hitless, but forgivable because it's only the first boss, and it was still very satisfying to execute. It's also aided by his introductory cutscene and characterization. All in all, a terrific first dungeon. Only thing I'm not a fan of is the stone tablet that tells you about the gemstone puzzle. It's unnecessary and handholdy. The Earth Temple is my least favorite dungeon in the game. You obtain the bomb bag pretty early, almost immediately in fact, which is very strange. And since bombs were already introduced in the preceding area, this temple feels like it doesn't have a mechanic of its own. There's this giant ball that you use to cross the lava, which is something, but it's not very interesting. This dungeon feels like a step down in length and complexity from the already simple Skyview Temple, and while that one gets a pass due to being the first dungeon, Earth Temple does not. I think the Elden Volcano area is probably harder to figure out than this dungeon. I certainly spent more time on that part when I was a kid. Unfortunately, things don't get any better with the boss. All you do is throw bombs at him. That's literally it. It's fought on a ramp, which is unique, I guess. I can't think of another Zelda boss that's fought on this kind of terrain, but that's the only positive. It might sound like I hate this dungeon based on all that, but I don't think it's that bad necessarily, it's more just underwhelming. The Lizalfos are cool enemies at least. Lanayru Mining Facility is my favorite dungeon in the first arc, mostly due to the timeshift stones. The temple's layout is more complex and much longer than the previous two. I also like how it loops back on itself with these shortcuts. The puzzles are pretty simple, but require a bit of thinking. I like how they hit a timeshift stone under some dust behind these bars. It's simple, but effective. The numbered gemstones puzzle would have been great if the camera didn't fixate on these symbols once revealed. It's basically giving the answer away. The Gust Bellows isn't an amazing item, but it gets some usage here and there, and it's unique to Skyward Sword. I also really dig the music in this place. It's kinda sad, but also eerie. Good stuff. The boss is pretty good too. I got a kick out of shield bashing the claws and charge attack. The Ancient Cistern is a fan-favorite dungeon for very good reason. Skyward Sword has a lot of great temples, but this one feels like it's telling a story. Part of that's because it literally is based on an old Japanese short story called The Spider's Thread. It's a pristine, beautiful water temple hiding a dark secret in its basement. Link must change the statue's position to explore the dark underbelly, then climb up a sculptural thread whilst being pursued by literal zombies, return the statue to its original position, then go back down to hell to pick up the boss key, and finish things off. It was moments like this on my first playthrough that made me think I was playing the greatest game of all time. It's so damn creative. I love dungeons with layout changes. I love playing with the water pressure. The riddle to open that first lock is cool. The whip is an item unique to this game and has some utility even outside this dungeon. The dungeon is beautiful, thematically cohesive, and an absolute blast to explore. The greatness continues into the boss fight. Kalaktos is one of the game's best. If I could describe it in one word, it would be cathartic. Ripping off his limbs with the whip feels so good. And it just gets better in Phase 2, in which you dismember him with his own huge-ass sword. I might even recommend using motion controls just for this one fight, it's that good. This whole stretch is one of Skyward Sword's finest hours for sure. The Ancient Cistern is one of the best dungeons in the entire series. The Sand Ship, directly afterwards, crazily enough, is almost just as good, and maybe even a bit better in some ways. Its pirate ship setting is unique in the series, and it's elevated even further by the timeshift mechanic. This dungeon revolves around a single timeshift stone that affects the entire level. The puzzles will require you to switch time periods constantly from different parts of the ship. You'll have to think carefully about how you move about the dungeon, as parts of it are accessible in one time period but not the other. Very cool and creative puzzles here, even the ones that don't use the timeshift stones. I really enjoyed solving the door code puzzle early on. This one actually had me stuck for a bit. Good stuff. The Sand Ship also gets my pick for best mini-boss. It's a robot pirate in a Zelda game that you have to push overboard. I don't even think I have to say anything, that's just cool as hell. I love its non-linearity, complex layout, and creative puzzles. The dungeon item is obviously very iconic, and the vibes are great too. Oh, and when you're at the boss, the build-up is fantastic and a great curveball. The boss is attacking the vessel from outside you, and you have to skyward strike the tentacles to get through. The ship starts to crack and tilt. You emerge onto the ruined deck with the pouring rain setting the stage perfectly. The Sand Ship has been kicking ass for its entire duration, only to drop the ball at the very last possible second because the fight against Tantalus is pretty lackluster. You just do some more skyward strikes and shoot him in his insultingly obvious weak point. It's not horrible, but just not all that fun. Also, the design is way too goofy and familiar. I still love the Sand Ship and think it's one of the best in the series, but man, that boss is really disappointing. The Fire Sanctuary is my least favorite of the second arc dungeons, since its visual theme feels too similar to the Earth Temple, it doesn't have the thematic brilliance of the Ancient Cistern, and it lacks the tight design of the Sand Ship. Despite that, it's still a pretty great dungeon. It at least has its own unique mechanics, such as using these water fruits to traverse the lava. I like the puzzle of realizing you can stab one and carry it on your sword. There's also the Bomberman sections accessible via the dungeon item. These are okay, but I'm glad they didn't design a boss around them. It's also very strange how there's a stone tablet that straight up tells you the solution to the boss key puzzle. I don't get it. It really would not have been that tough for players to figure out on their own. There have been way harder puzzles before this in the same game. The boss is enjoyable at least, always great to see Girahim. I don't even mind that it's a repeat of the first boss since it's just really fun to do. Now, there's one dungeon left, and this will lead us nicely into a broader discussion about Skyward Sword's endgame as a whole. So, with the Song of the Hero quest being how it is Skyward Sword a case of a great game falling apart in its final act? Well, not quite. This is because Skyward Sword saves some of its best content for the very end. Once Link has all three parts of the Song of the Hero and completes the Silent Realm in Skyloft, it's pretty enjoyable by the way, the path to the final dungeon is revealed. Potential hot take of the century incoming. The Skykeep is my favorite dungeon in the game, and probably my favorite final dungeon in any Zelda game. Being able to change the design of the dungeon at will is such a cool, creative concept, and it's executed extremely well. It turns simple navigation into a puzzle. You have to think about what rooms connect to where in order to make a path to each piece of the Triforce. As for the content within these rooms, it utilizes themes from all the previous dungeons to create new, contained puzzles and obstacle courses. This is par for the course for final dungeons in 3D Zeldas, but the sliding puzzle really elevates this one into goated status. I like the combat challenges too. It was nice to see the robot pirate return, and the huge enemy gauntlet for the Triforce of Courage was also very enjoyable. Once you've got all three pieces of the Triforce, the goddess statue descends into the sealed temple, successfully eradicating Demise. Zelda wakes up from her slumber only to immediately be kidnapped by Girahim, who takes her through the Gate of Time so that he can revive Demise in the past with Link in pursuit. Then, in one of the most hype moments in any Zelda game, Girahim summons hordes upon hordes of bokoblins to delay Link's chase. It's a great section. It works off pure spectacle and does a great job of showing off how strong Link has become over the course of the journey, now being able to dispatch multiple bokoblins with just a single blow. When it's finally time to confront Girahim once and for all, the game doesn't disappoint. I love this duel. In the first phase, you're trying to knock Girahim off the edge so that you can perform a fatal blow from above. It's mechanically very simple, but cool as hell. When you reach the bottom, Girahim brings out his sword to begin the fight proper. The song changing keys is a really nice touch as well. His attacks are as satisfying as ever to shield bash and counter, this time with a stab. There's also an opportunity for some good old-fashioned energy tennis when he uses his evil Skyward Strike, though unfortunately I wasn't able to do it properly. I appreciate how Girahim is supposed to be an evil counterpart to Fi, which is most obvious in this fight due to his design and how he transforms into the weapon of the final boss, Demise. On that note, let's talk about Demise for a bit. I've heard some criticism of how he's not really in the game that much, which undermines his status as the main villain. However, he's not really the main villain. Girahim is the main villain of the game as far as I'm concerned, and he does a great job. Demise is just here to serve as the final boss, and for what it's worth, I really like what little we do get to see of him. His design is really cool, and I like how he shows quite a bit of respect for Link. Even when he's defeated, his reaction is one of bewilderment rather than rage. He's a pretty polite guy for being a Demon King. While I empathize with people's desire for an emotional connection to their final boss, I'm fine with this setup. The game already has a strong villain, so I don't think it was necessary to give Demise more screen time just for the sake of it. It also helps that the fight against him is spectacular. While it's not super difficult or anything, he's definitely the most dangerous enemy in the game. His attacks deal high damage, and his combos are more extensive compared to the other fights. Getting to Skyward Strike him with lightning in Phase 2 is also very cathartic. It's the atmosphere and spectacle that sells it though. This setting feels more otherworldly than anything else in the game. The rain and lightning effects elevate it even further. This is probably my favorite final boss in any Zelda game. This whole final stretch is amazing, so much so that I felt the need to dedicate an entire section of the video just to gushing about it. And this matters. A good ending can change how you view a work as a whole, and not every Zelda has a good one. Looking at you, Breath of the Wild. It makes it so much easier to get through the Song of the Hero quest on replays, knowing that this content is waiting for you at the end. So, a bit of post-production commentary here, because I actually recorded this quite a while ago, and in the time since that, I actually replayed most of Wind Waker, but I stopped right when the Triforce Hunt quest starts. And that makes 2 times now where I've stopped a playthrough of Wind Waker at the exact same point. And I bring this up not to shit on Wind Waker, because I still think it's a great Zelda game, but I just want to emphasize that I've never left a Skyward Sword playthrough unfinished, and I think that really says something about the quality of the endgame. So, what's the verdict? I certainly found more to criticize about this game than when I was 11. The reused content is a big problem, and the sky certainly felt underwhelming. Are my childhood memories ruined? Is Skyward Sword not the masterpiece I thought it was? No. It's true, this game has quite a few flaws, but it also does a lot really, really well. While the bad bits do bother me, I appreciate the good parts even more. Sure, the hand-holding is annoying, probably to a greater degree than any Zelda, the sky is really disappointing, the third arc is underwhelming, but at the same time, I think it's really cool that this game straight up has the best villain in the series. I think the combat is really fun and satisfying. Some of the best bosses in the series are in this game. It's also oozing with charm and humor. The dungeons, the most important part of any Zelda game as far as I'm concerned, are fantastic and creative, rivaled only by Twilight Princess and maybe Ocarina of Time. And Skyward Sword has my favorite finale of any Zelda game, being great in terms of spectacle and mechanics. I had an absolute blast reliving this childhood favorite. Would it have been as enjoyable if I didn't have this nostalgic connection with the game? It's impossible to say, and I don't really think it matters because the feelings I got replaying it were genuine. I don't care if I'm the only person on the planet who loves Skyward Sword. It's not perfect, no game is, but I'll always be willing to defend the parts I do love because I think they're genuinely outstanding. I still adore this game, and I consider it to be one of my favorite Zeldas. It hits even harder because, as of now, this is the last traditional 3D Zelda game. More and more, as time goes by, I find myself getting increasingly concerned about the direction the series is going in. Don't get me wrong, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are both great games in their own way, but I've got a ton of issues with both, and they also barely feel like Zelda games a lot of the time. Echoes of Wisdom was a step in the right direction, featuring gameplay more akin to the classic Zelda formula, but now I want a 3D game like this, and given how much money the open world Zelda's made, I wonder if we'll ever get it. I want the Zelda that I grew up with. Is that selfish of me? Well, maybe a little. Franchises are allowed to change after all, but only so long as they don't lose sight of what made them great in the first place.
I fear that we might be heading to that point with the open world Zeldas. I have been waiting for a true blue 3D Zelda dungeon since I've played Skyward Sword. None of this finding 5 terminals crap. Give me a more focused adventure, or if Zelda games have to be open world from here on out, at least give us real dungeons. Please. Oh, and have some of them be discoverable in the open world. That would be sick. Take a page from Elden Ring. You can have an open world whilst keeping what's known to work from previous installments. I know it's possible, and I know I'm not alone in feeling this way. I want to be optimistic about the future of the series, but I also hope that you watching can at least understand my concerns even if you disagree with me and think the open world formula is fine as is. I will most likely end up playing the new Zelda on day one no matter what it ends up being like. But more than anything, I just want it to feel like Zelda again. And now I know that I wasn't wrong when I was 11. Skyward Sword is a great Zelda game.